It is the 4th of July, 1957. In Turin, Italy, Fiat lines up dozens of its brand new Nuova 500 along the streets for a public procession from the Mirafiori factory to the city center. Italy is still poor. Petrol is expensive. Steel is expensive. And the car being celebrated that morning is 9 feet and 9 inches long, weighs 470 kilograms, and is powered by an engine of 479 cubic centimeters producing 13 horsepower. 13 horsepower. What Fiat was unveiling that morning was not, by any conventional measure, a spectacular machine. It had no door handles on the outside. Its single windscreen wiper had no automatic return, which meant the driver had to push it back manually. The gearbox required double clutching to change gear cleanly. The launch price 465,000 lire was, for many of the Italians who watched the procession go by, close to a year's wages. And yet, over the next 18 years, 3,893,294 of them were built. The Cinquecento, the 500, became the most produced Fiat in history up to that point. The car that genuinely motorized Italy, and one of the most instantly recognizable objects in the entire history of European industrial design. How does a 13-horsepower car with no door handles conquer a continent? That is exactly what this film is about. Here are 13 facts about the Fiat 500 that will change the way you think about this tiny, remarkable machine. Fact 1. It was born from a crisis, designed during a war. The story of the Nuova 500 does not begin in 1957. It begins in the early 1940s, when Allied bombs were falling on Turin and the Mirafiori plant was occupied by German forces. Fiat's managing director, Vittorio Valletta, made a decision that takes a certain audacity to appreciate properly. He asked his chief engineer, Dante Giacosa, to start designing the cars that would go into production after the war ended. Not when the war ended, during it. Giacosa was already the father of the original Fiat 500 Topolino, the Mickey Mouse car of 1936, and of the Fiat 600 that arrived in 1955. With the Nuova 500, his brief was stark. Build something smaller than the 600, cheaper than anything on the market, and genuinely usable in the narrow streets and thin wallets of post-war Italy. The ideas he developed during those bombing raids, refined across more than a decade, became the car that Turin saw on the 4th of July, 1957. Fact 2. It was smaller than you remember. The Fiat Nuova 500 was 2.97 meters long, that is 9 feet and 9 inches. To put that in perspective, a standard parking space in Britain is approximately 4.8 meters long. The Nuova 500 was barely half that. It was 1.32 meters wide, just over 4 feet, 3 inches. And it was 1.325 meters tall, meaning it was almost a perfect cube from the side. The wheelbase was 1.84 meters, 72.44 inches. For comparison, the Mini that Issigonis would launch 2 years later, in 1959, had a wheelbase of 79.9 inches, 7.5 inches, more than the Cinquecento. The Fiat 500 was smaller than the Mini. Empty. It weighed 470 kilograms, 1,036 pounds. Fully loaded, it reached 680 kilograms. These are numbers that make a modern hatchback feel like a tank. And yet the Nuova 500 could carry 2 adults and 70 kilograms of luggage, a genuinely useful amount which made it not a toy but a working car for ordinary families. Fact 3. The engine was a world first for Fiat. The Nuova 500's engine was not just small, it was historically significant. Mounted at the rear of the car, following the pattern of the Volkswagen Beetle and the Fiat 600, both of which had established that layout as the logical choice for a lightweight economy car. The new unit was a 2-cylinder, air-cooled, vertical inline engine displacing 479 cubic centimeters and producing 13 brake horsepower. It was Fiat's first air-cooled engine. No water, no radiator, no coolant to freeze in winter or boil in a traffic jam. The absence of a cooling system was a deliberate engineering choice that reduced weight, reduced maintenance requirements, and reduced cost, three things that mattered intensely when the target buyer was someone for whom this car represented a genuinely serious financial commitment. The gearbox was a 4-speed unit, but it was unsynchronized, what the trade would call a constant mesh box. Double clutching was required to make smooth changes. That was not unusual for the period, but it meant that driving a Cinquecento well demanded skill and familiarity, qualities that the early owners acquired quickly because they had no choice. The top speed of the original Nuova was approximately 85 kilometers per hour, 53 miles per hour. Enough, in 1957 Italy, to keep up with everything that mattered. Fact 4. The public hated it. Then, they could not get enough of it. The launch price of 465,000 lire sounds low in absolute terms. In 1957 Italy, it represented something close to 13 monthly salaries for an average industrial worker. The Topolino that the Nuova 500 was replacing had itself cost 490,000 lire, and buyers who had been expecting a larger, better-equipped successor to the old car were confronted instead with something smaller, more basic, and only marginally cheaper. The initial public reaction was hostile in some quarters. The car was accused of being too Spartan. Critics pointed at the fact that the original Economica version had no opening front quarter lights, no external door handles. A cord inside the cabin was used to open the doors, and a windscreen wiper that did not return automatically when switched off. Dante Giacosa himself later wrote that when the car was launched, he understood the reaction of the public. Fiat moved quickly. Within 3 months, by the Turin Motor Show of October that same year, a revised Normale specification was available at 490,000 lire, with improved trim, increased compression ratio, a new camshaft, and an upgraded carburetor that raised power to 15 horsepower and top speed to 90 kilometers per hour. The Economica version continued at the lower price with the original engine. By 1960, 181,036 examples of all Nuova variants had been produced. The public had made its decision. Fact 5. The doors were hinged the wrong way, on purpose. If you have ever spent time with an early Fiat 500, you will have noticed something immediately unsettling about the doors. They are hinged at the rear. The front edge opens outward, into traffic. In the automotive world, this configuration is known as suicide doors, a name that does not require much explanation. The Nuova 500, the 500D that followed in 1960, and the Estate Giardiniera version all retained this rear-hinged layout. It was not a mistake or an oversight. It was a deliberate choice by Giacosa's team to simplify the body structure and reduce the width of the door pillars, which in a car this narrow made a genuine difference to the feel of entry and exit. The arrangement persisted until June 1965, when new European road safety regulations came into force, requiring passenger cars to have front-hinged doors. The 500F, introduced that month, finally reversed the hinge position. The Giardiniera estate was technically classified as a commercial vehicle, which exempted it from the rule, and it retained its suicide doors until the end of its production in 1975. For collectors today, a genuine early Nuova 500 with rear-hinged doors is one of the most immediately recognizable and sought-after variants of the entire model family. Fact 6. Carlo Abarth was there on the very first day. On the same day that the Nuova 500 made its debut at the Turin Motor Show in October 1957, just 3 months after the public launch, Carlo Abarth was already there with his own version of the public car. Abarth, Karl Abarth, by birth, an Austrian who had made Turin his home and his workshop, had obtained one of the first Nuova 500 seconds and applied his standard treatment, a higher compression ratio, raised from 6.55 to 1 to 8.7 to 1, a Weber 26 IMB carburetor in place of the standard unit, and a specially designed Abarth exhaust system. Without touching the engine capacity, He had raised output from 13 brake horsepower to 20, and top speed from 85 to 100 kilometers per hour. 2 weeks after the motor show, on the 15th of October, 1957, Abarth sent a group of his tuned Fiat 500 seconds to the Monza racing circuit and broke 6 international class records. Fiat took notice. The relationship between the Scorpion badge and the Cinquecento would deepen over the following decade into one of the most productive partnerships in European small-car motorsport, producing the legendary 595 and 695 variants that remain among the most admired homologation specials ever built on a sub-700 cubic centimeter platform. Fact 7. There was an estate version with a flat engine under the floor. In 1960, alongside the launch of the 500D, Fiat introduced a variant that remains one of the most ingeniously packaged small vehicles ever built, the 500 Giardiniera, the little garden car. And also, it was a 3-door estate version of the Cinquecento, and the engineering challenge it presented was considerable. The problem was the engine. In the standard 500, the rear-mounted engine sat vertically in the tail of the car. In the Giardiniera, a luggage bay was needed above and behind the rear seats. There was no room for a vertical engine. Fiat's solution was elegant and entirely practical. The engine was tilted onto its side and laid horizontally under the floor of the boot, with the exhaust running along the bottom of the car. The result was a flat loading surface above the mechanical components and a usable luggage bay in a vehicle barely 3 meters long. The Giardiniera was officially classified as a commercial vehicle throughout its production life, which, as already noted, exempted it from the front hinge door requirement of 1965. It remained in continuous production until 1975, the last year of the entire Cinquecento range, making it the longest-running body variant in the 500 family. For families who needed genuine practicality and something small enough to park in medieval Italian city centers, there was nothing else quite like it. Fact 8. It won Italy's most prestigious design prize, first time for any car maker. In 1959, Dante Giacosa received the Compasso d'Oro, the Golden Compass, for the design of the Fiat 500. The Compasso d'Oro is Italy's most prestigious industrial design award, established in 1954 and considered one of the most respected design honors in the world. What made this recognition historically significant was the category. The Compasso d'Oro had never previously been awarded to an automotive manufacturer. The Fiat Cinquecento was the first car in history to receive it. That distinction, not a motorsport prize, not a sales record, but recognition from the industrial design establishment, placed the little 500 alongside the great designed objects of its era. In 2017, Fiat marked 60 years of the Cinquecento with an exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. A 1968 example of the 500F donated by Fiat Chrysler Automobiles Heritage entered MoMA's permanent design collection. It sits there today, alongside chairs, lamps, and objects chosen specifically for their contribution to the history of human-centered design. A 9'9" economy car with 13 horsepower in the Museum of Modern Art. That is a sentence that requires a moment. Fact 9. Austria built its own version with a completely different engine. The Fiat 500 was produced under license in 2 countries outside Italy. In Germany, from October 1961, a version was assembled in Heilbronn under the Neckar name, a straightforward rebadging exercise under a complicated arrangement involving NSU motorcars. But in Austria, something more interesting happened. Steyr Daimler Puch, the Graz-based engineering company, produced its own version of the Cinquecento from 1957 to 1973, the Steyr Puch 500. It used Fiat's body shell and running gear in almost every respect, with one crucial exception, the engine. Steyr replaced the Italian 2-cylinder with their own unit, a horizontally opposed twin-cylinder engine derived from motorcycle practice, displacing 493 cubic centimeters and producing 16 brake horsepower in standard form. The Puch engine had a reputation for exceptional reliability in alpine conditions, cold starts, sustained mountain climbs, steep descents with engine braking demands that the Fiat unit occasionally struggled with. A performance variant, the Steyr Puch 650 TR2, produced from 1965 to 1969, used a 643 cubic centimeter version of the same engine, producing 27 brake horsepower, and was genuinely quick in its class, winning class victories in the Alpine Rally and establishing the Puch-engined cars as a cult within a cult that Austrian and German enthusiasts still celebrate today. Fact 10. Ghia built a beach car for millionaires on yachts. Not every Cinquecento was destined for the commute to the Fiat plant or the weekly market run in a small Italian town. In the late 1950s and through the 1960s, the Carrozzeria Ghia produced one of the most joyfully absurd variants ever constructed on the 500 platform, the Fiat 500 Jolly. The Jolly, which means cheerful or merry in Italian, had no doors, no roof, a fringed canopy overhead, and wicker seats. It was designed specifically for use aboard private yachts and at Mediterranean coastal resorts, where its tiny size made it ideal for loading onto a deck and running along a harbor front between the jetty and the hotel. Celebrities, aristocrats, and the wealthy international set who spent their summers on the Italian Riviera acquired Ghia Jollies as a matter of fashion. Production numbers were tiny. Jollies were bespoke commissions rather than production cars in any conventional sense, which is precisely why they are among the most valuable and sought-after Cinquecento variants at auction. Today, a genuine Ghia Jolly in good condition is considered one of the most desirable small collector cars in existence, a concentration of 1960s Italian summer style in a package that weighs less than some modern motorcycles. Fact 11. America got it. Then America gave up on it. The Fiat 500 was sold in the United States for a brief period in the late 1950s and up to approximately 1961. American specification cars are easily identified by one unusual feature: 7-inch headlamps grafted onto the front bodywork, replacing the 5-inch European units that did not meet American safety lighting standards. The result was a car that looked, from the front, as though it had borrowed its eyes from a vehicle several classes above it. American sales were modest and then ended. The reason was not a mystery. A 9'9" car with a 50-mile-per-hour top speed was genuinely hazardous on American highways designed for vehicles traveling at double that speed. In 1961, Fiat withdrew the 500 from the American market, where it would not officially return until the modern revival of the model in 2012, 51 years later. In Australia and New Zealand, the 500 found a more sustained following. In New Zealand, locally assembled examples were marketed under the name Fiat Bambina, the little child, a name that stuck in the local memory long after the last car had been sold, and that enthusiasts in those markets still use affectionately. Today, Fact 12, the final version used a bigger engine to compete with its own successor. By the early 1970s, Fiat was ready to replace the Cinquecento with a new car, the Fiat 126, launched in 1972. It was squarer, more modern in its lines, and used a new 594 cubic centimeter engine, producing 23 brake horsepower. Fiat's intention was clear: customers were supposed to move on, but the public was reluctant to let go. So Fiat created one final evolution of the original car, the 500R, for rinnovata, meaning renewed, which took the 126's engine, detuned it from 23 to 18 brake horsepower to avoid competing too directly with the new model, and fitted it into the old Cinquecento body with a new set of pressed steel wheels and a revised interior. The top speed rose to 100 kilometers per hour. The 500R was produced from 1972 alongside the 126 until August 4, 1975. When the last Cinquecento came off the assembly line at the Sicil Fiat plant in Termini Imerese in Sicily, not at Mirafiori in Turin, where the story had begun 18 years earlier. The 126 sold well in Eastern Europe, particularly in Poland where it was assembled as the Polski Fiat. In Italy, it was never quite the Cinquecento. Nothing ever was. Fact 13. 3,893,294. That is the exact total production figure for the Fiat 500, in all variants, from the first Nuova in 1957 to the last 500R in 1975, as confirmed by Fiat's own records. 3,893,294 cars, built across 3 factories, Mirafiori in Turin, the Auto Bianchi plant in Desio, and finally Termini Imerese in Sicily, over exactly 18 years. To place that in context, the Fiat 600, which the 500 had been designed to undercut, and which was itself a considerable commercial success, running from 1955 to 1970, produced 2,677,313 units in 15 years. The original Topolino, the car the Nuova 500 replaced, had reached just over 509,000 in its entire production life, from 1936 to 1955. Partly because the war had halted it, the Nuova 500 produced 7 times that total. For many years, until the Fiat Uno, the Panda, and the Punto eventually passed the 1 million mark in their respective generations. The 1957 to 1975 Cinquecento remained the biggest-selling and most built Fiat in the company's history. The car that Giacosa designed in the drawing offices of a bombed city, that 13 horsepower of air-cooled ambition that barely reached 53 miles per hour, had outsold everything that came before it and most of what came after. 13 facts, 13 windows into a car that confounded expectations at every turn. Too small, too slow, too Spartan at launch, and yet it won the most prestigious industrial design prize in Italy, entered the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art in New York, was tuned into a competition weapon within months of its debut, was built under license in 2 other countries with entirely different engines, became the beach toy of Mediterranean millionaires, motorized a nation recovering from the worst decade in its modern history, and sold nearly 4 million copies in 18 years. What the Fiat Cinquecento demonstrated is something that the motor industry has had to relearn in every generation, that smallness, properly executed, is not a compromise. It is a discipline. The limitations Giacosa faced, minimum cost, minimum weight, minimum size, produced a car that could not afford a single wasted element. Every decision mattered. Every gram mattered. Every lira mattered. And the result was something that 60 years of history have confirmed as genuinely beautiful, genuinely useful, and genuinely irreplaceable. If you owned one of these, or if your family had one, or if you spent your childhood in the back of a Giardiniera, traveling across Europe on roads that are now motorways, we want to hear about it. The comment section below belongs to you. Those memories, the sound of that 2-cylinder engine, the feeling of the canvas roof, the double clutch on a hill start, are part of a living record that no archive can replicate. If this program has been worth your time, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. We rely entirely on your support to keep making these films, and we are genuinely grateful for every one of you who watches. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you in the next one.